Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what time of the day it is that you're reviewing this content. Thank you so much for committing your time, not just in this training, but in your important role in being a treasurer for your division in serving the Florida Counseling Association, in serving our membership body, and most importantly, serving our profession and our clients. My name is Leo Balsero. I am the treasurer of the Florida Counseling Association, currently serving the 2024-2025 fiscal year, and my time with you today is committed to making sure that you feel well equipped and endowed in your role as treasurer as it relates to your division as well as the Counseling Association as a whole. So moving forward, I do have a presentation here that I would like to share with everybody, and I will begin the presentation from the start. And in today's presentation and discussion, the central theme here is fiscal responsibility. And of course, what does that exactly mean? It can mean a lot of various things related to expenditures, income, budgeting, but you'll come to see that it includes all that and much more. In today's session, or at least by the end of today's session, you should be able to identify basic financial management concepts relevant to your role as a treasurer. I find in my nuanced role as a treasurer that understanding financial concepts helped me to feel a sense of competence in not only what I was doing as a treasurer, but also the insights that I'm able to generate and provide for others relative to the functions of our association. And my hope is, of course, for you to feel the same. Our next objective is for us to apply tools to ensure healthy financial operations. And we will emphasize this term again later, but I think what is most important relative to our role is financial accountability. That relates to how we are projecting, how we are spending, how we are earning a profit, how we are growing our divisions as well as the organization, and other ways to maximize growth potential, among other things. Hopefully after this presentation, you will also understand your role and responsibilities as a treasurer as it pertains to your direct responsibilities serving the board of your division, as well as serving the board of the executive committee through the means of the finance committee. Finally, as a result of this presentation, the hope is for you to recognize both the divisional and organizational processes encompassing the treasurer role within the Florida Counseling Association. So some agenda items for today. I do have a case study for all of us to reflect and for us to discuss on our own time. In this presentation, we will discuss relevant financial concepts. We will discuss the budget. We will discuss crafting your budget. We will also discuss the finance committee, relevant forms and contacts, and then finally, we will conclude with the case study reflection. And speaking of case study, here it is. As I present it to you now, consider this. Daniel opened a new division within the Florida Counseling Association, which is a joyous but critical occasion. Daniel understands that, like many good things, profitability takes time. At the same time, oftentimes in the world of business, Daniel will be challenged to commit organizational resources towards projects and services before they expect to make any income. Finally, with a first-hand account, Daniel has doubt whether the division can manage well throughout the year, let alone affirm for themselves if the division can keep its head above water. After all, in the world of business, there are no guarantees. So, what information does Daniel need to know to minimize risk? What kind of tools are available to Daniel that can ensure financial security, profitability, and accountability in the long run? We can return to these questions following the presentation to assess our level of knowledge pertaining to what is presented today, in hopes to serve Daniel and in hopes to serve your division as well. So let's discuss financial concepts. I find that in my role, again, financial concepts empowered me to serve as a treasurer, and my hope is for you to feel that sense of empowerment as well. One of the more central figures of concepts that we'll discuss today is risk, which is defined as an exposure to danger, harm, or loss. And specific to our role as a treasurer, we will be dealing with loss or managing loss. We would also be discussing risk management, which involves the forecasting and evaluation of financial risks, together with the identification of procedures to avoid or minimize their impact. This provides a detailed nuance for our budgeting process, which we will discuss later, but what's most important to ascertain from this is that a part of developing a budget is understanding what risk factors are at play relative to our current performance as well as our historical performance, and finally what we might anticipate in the future. We will also emphasize revenue, which is the total amount of income generated by the sale of goods or services related to the company's primary operations. And then we will also discuss the budget, which in a general sense is an estimate of income and expenditures for a set period of time. As you know, our period of time that we will be working with is between July 1st and June 30th. 30 days past September, April, June. Okay, good. So I'm on point. So we will be working with the budget, and hopefully for some, you have inherited a budget from your previous treasurer. For others, you might not have this privilege, but that's okay, because by the end of this presentation, as well as our collaboration, you will feel empowered to craft your own budget and have it approved on time. So let's discuss some more. Profit, very important concept. Income that remains after accounting for all expenses, debts, additional income streams, and operating costs. I think this is what we're all after with regards to our financial success in our divisions, let alone in our personal lives. But of course, in our role as treasurer, we are going to be challenged to come up with creative ways to drive profit. Of course, we can't talk about profit without discussing loss. When total expenses, including taxes, fees, interests, and depreciation, exceed the income or revenue produced for a period of time. So when discussing loss, we want to emphasize how we can minimize it as much as we can. And arguably a advanced concept that I hope sticks with you all, but a very important concept that I wanted to present today is profit margin, which basically is an arithmetic function representing the share of net income over total revenue. In other words, it is an opportunity for you to assess whether a specific event or a specific method of fundraising or a specific item in your budget is efficient, it's working for you, or it's working against you. How you might arrive to this involves the arithmetic function of what a profit margin is. And so basically, when you are able to divide the net income over total revenue, you should get a percentage. And with that percentage, that should basically tell you that if your profit margin is a certain percentage, expect to earn a percentage for each dollar accrued associated with an event. So, for instance, if the Florida Counseling Association operated a convention that featured a 20% profit margin, then expect the Florida Counseling Association to earn 20 cents more for each additional dollar driven into the convention. This should help you gauge which area of your division is functioning properly or needs financial revision. And of course, when we discuss financial revision, you're going to be looking at, the bottom line. How much does it cost to provide specific services? How much does it cost to leverage certain platforms? Are there certain resources that are available to us at a lower cost or at a free cost? To whom can we network to help support our vision, mission, objectives, and goals? All of which are highly relevant when you as a treasurer and with your board, ideally, are evaluating specific line items for their merit. And hopefully profit margin can be used as a tool here to help you get a clear picture as to whether something is making money or not, or whether if it's serving your organization as a whole. It can also be used to compare financial performance from recent years of data. So if you're tracking profit margin from the previous year to the current year, that's a great opportunity to put on your solution-focused hat on and discuss what's working, what's not, and what can we do different. So That being said, let's discuss the budget. And, to emphasize the previous definition, we're going to emphasize it here as a central tool for you, the treasurer, in your function within your division. It is a tool that is comprised of should be comprised of real-time financial information pertaining to operating areas of your division. Some important items relative to this include line items, which we will be mentioning many times throughout the year. Line items are basically items on the budget that are categorized into either income or expense. The budget in and of itself provides an added dimension of time, as represented by additional columns indicating the proposed budget for the previous year and the proposed budget for the current year. And finally, historical budgets from previous years can serve to provide a baseline for financial projections in the future year, as well as identify growth areas into the future year. So let's take a look at what a blank budget would look like. So you have the line items as identified by income, expenses, and each specific line item is identified here. You also have columns, which provides that added dimension of time, including what was proposed in 2022, what is proposed in 2023, and what is the actual budget with what we're working with. So I realize the figures in terms of years are not reflective of the current recording, but bear with me on that. As you expand the budget or the functions of your division, you may add line items to your budget. For instance, if you think that there is an event that would benefit your division, you ideally would put that under both income and expenses, as I imagine it may drive up revenue, but also may drive up some cost. However, just be mindful, removing line items from the base budget is not recommended. That's just to ensure continuity throughout the years for each treasurer entering the new role, as well as maintaining a sense of simplicity, because sometimes, and especially in this case, less is more. So any line item whose actuals threaten to exceed its proposed figure throughout the year must be approved by the Finance Committee. So what this means is that throughout the year, if you're tracking your budget and you have proposed figures that become unrealistic and the actuals figures, which is the actual dollar amount that you're spending throughout the year, threatens to go over that proposed figure, that must be brought to the Finance Committee for any future approvals regarding expenditures. This is to ensure financial accountability, as well as provide a circle of feedback in the ways in which each division can maximize their financial success. So speaking of ensuring financial success, we have to talk about how do we craft a budget? Because if I were to go back here and I threw this budget at you and I said, let's make a budget, it's a pretty ambiguous process. And so I took the time to set up some steps that hopefully will help you feel empowered to craft your own budget, which is comprised of 4 steps. Step 1 involves acquiring supportive documents. So ideally, when you're working with your budget development, you need something to help you to establish a baseline of understanding of what to expect for the current year. What will help you in this endeavor will include actual financial statements of the most recent year. Annual figures are preferred, and you can acquire this information from the office manager. You may also have the budget document from the previous year, which should be provided by your previous treasurer, but in the event that is not available, your office manager also can serve in this capacity. So once we acquire these supportive documents, we can kind of ascertain what step 2 is going to be, which is we need to forecast our years with the supporting documents we have as context. So looking at these documents, you want to be able to answer some questions to paint a picture, because I like to think that numbers should be presented with context. And is with the context that we can get a better understanding in terms of how we're functioning and what we can do to move forward. So answer these questions. Did the previous budget make a profit or a loss? And, answering that question, what worked and what didn't? You may also, collect contextual information from officers from the previous years to gauge expectations for the next year. So if you consult with your executive board and you want to get a better understanding of, let's say, membership figures or webinar attendance or something to that effect, this information should be relevant in the ways in which you craft your budget so that you can expect a certain level of revenue relative to what you charge up front to your members. And hopefully in collecting this information will help you to get a contextual understanding of what your budget will look like moving forward. Finally, can you anticipate future risk factors in the upcoming year? Are previous risk factors still relevant? These questions are very important because in not answering these questions, we leave ourselves vulnerable to unaccounted for factors that might affect certain figures such as membership and attendance to webinars and other functions as well. So in understanding what the risks are, ideally you want to be able to plan around these risks in a way that addresses them effectively. So if you know that your webinars aren't driving a lot of interest and such, perhaps we might consider the format or perhaps even the venue to where these webinars are occurring. Maybe there's a risk factor involved in the platform we're using, or maybe there's a risk factor involved with the overall economy and the overall profession that we want to understand so that we can move forward with the right ideas in mind. Once we have this forecasting information in mind, then we are going to be challenged to decide what our financial objectives are going to be for that year. I like to think of it, three different categories of financial objectives. One is the status quo, which is an emphasis to say that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So assuming that everything else is constant, if you're expecting the same level of membership and you're expecting the same number of risk factors and the same methods of going around said risk factors, so on and so forth, you don't expect any major changes, it can be prudent to repeat the budget from the previous year. That being said, this is important to understand that if you're choosing this option, you're opting out of financial growth and you're opting out of preparing for a buffer in the case of a future risk factor emerging, for whatever reason. Speaking of which, you might also decide that your financial objectives should encompass financial growth, which is an emphasis to say that if it works, let's do more of it. Consider adding line items for new events, consider increasing the frequency of successful events, or consider working with the existing line items to maximize efficiency, which, again, if we're looking at profit margin, or in other words, if we're looking to, make a certain event or line item more efficient, we probably want to look for methods to reduce cost. We also want to look for methods to increase participation, both of which should serve you very well. And ideally, one or the other, or both, it would be prudent for your executive board to establish objectives to ensure that this efficiency will occur. Finally, if, financial recovery, which if it doesn't work, do something different. This is something to say if your division experienced adversity in the previous year, you're probably going to want to revise your budget for opportunity to cut costs and improve your margins. You might want to consider different ways to drive membership, drive participation and engagement. You may also consider scaling back or eliminating functions that don't serve your division. And you might also consider different ways in which you may lever volunteership to help drive some of your events into profitability. All of which, is very important to consider whether you choose status quo, financial growth, or financial recovery. Establishing an objective is going to be important because once this is created, you should be able to ascertain action items to make sure that these objectives are met. So if you are working on financial growth, you're probably going to work on action items involving membership drives or participation or something to that effect. That being said, answering or fulfilling this step should lead you well into step 4, which, pretty straightforward, you're going to input your financial figures into the proposed budget of that current year. Your numbers should reflect the alignment between the substance of your forecasting efforts and your financial objectives that you created for the upcoming year. And so, of course, once we create our budget, what do we do with it? And before we answer that question, I think it would be prudent to discuss our role in the Finance Committee. What is the Finance Committee? It has 3 important purposes. One is to oversee the fiscal operations and policies of the FCA in accordance with our bylaws. The second purpose is to ensure compliance with federal, state, and local statutes. And finally, we want to ensure the financial stability of the Florida Counseling Association as a whole. So, in this role, as you can imagine, it's an opportunity for you to provide your feedback related to ways which we can help keep the Florida Counseling Association financially accountable with respect to their overall budget. And so, emphasizing this later, it will also provide an opportunity to provide feedback for the executive board about ways that they can maximize their profitability as well. The committee is comprised of many important persons. The FCA treasurer serves as the chair. All division treasurers serve as a voting member, and also the immediate past president will serve as a voting member. That being said, the Finance Committee ideally meets every 2 months. They must meet at a frequent basis of no more or no less than, or actually I should say no less than 6 times every year. Because if the Finance Committee would need to meet on an emergency basis, that can happen. But that being said, meetings are going to be very important in your role moving forward, especially as it pertains to your voting power and the functions of the organization. So, speaking of which, the Finance Committee is responsible for processing budget requests from divisions and from the Executive Board. The Finance Committee is responsible for providing budget recommendations specific to line items for the Executive Board, reviewing monthly financial reports, providing updates on investments, and reviewing bank reconciliation documents from the FCA office. Specific to bank reconciliation documents, this is an opportunity to provide feedback on ways in which we can keep our Executive Board accountable. But also something to be said is that the office manager, and I will say this again too, the office manager you should be working very close with, because the office manager serves a very important role that serves your role as the treasurer. They provide financial documentation that helps you feel and keep abreast of the financial operations of your division, which usually comes in the form of monthly reports, but they can also be provided upon request. More on that information later. Another important role for the Finance Committee, or the responsibility, is to develop investment strategies. All financial investment decisions must be unanimous and must be reported to the Executive Board within 30 days. Finally, all other voting items brought to the Finance Committee must establish quorum. What does quorum mean? Not to be conflated with a majority vote. There is a certain minimum number of attendance that must be met for each Finance Committee. If there is an in-person vote, that means there must be at least 50% plus one additional person in attendance. So if there are 8 people needed, or if there are 8 people overall in the Finance Committee, that must mean 50% plus 1 would be 5 members. So that would qualify as quorum. Without quorum, we cannot vote. So that being said, when we cannot vote, we cannot function. Voting is a critical factor when it comes to decision-making processes and taking action for our organization, as well as having a budget in place. Speaking of budget, we got to talk about budget approval. Fact of the matter is, your division cannot function without a functioning budget. And the budget in order to be considered functional, has to be approved. So once your budget is developed, it must be presented to the committee. The budget should be presented in a manner that presents the numbers in context. So to better illustrate this, when you are presenting your budget, you need to be prepared to present on it and discuss a narrative related to this. So with the information you've acquired in your budget development process, you should be equipped to provide that narrative of where your division is, where your division has been, and where your division plans to go. You may also want to answer what has worked well for your division, and you can discuss how you will use this information to capitalize on future opportunities. An additional question to fulfill is what financial areas for growth exist for your division. Discuss these efforts you've made to revise the budget from its previous framework that reflects these areas for growth. Your budget is considered approved and official once it receives a majority vote within an established quorum. So that being said, in providing this presentation and narrative of your budget, be prepared for questions that your fellow committee members, including myself, may have. We just want to make sure that we are all held accountable and making sure that we're putting our best foot forward to emphasize our success, to emphasize each other's success. And I like to think that when we're providing feedback or areas for growth, we're doing so with the best intentions in mind and done so within a professional sense. So again, your budget is considered approved and official once it receives a majority vote within an established quorum. Hopefully for some of you, you have inherited a budget that is functioning into the current year. If you haven't, no worries, in the sense that you are not alone. I am available to you. The office manager will be available to you. Ideally, your executive board will be available to you. And if it means, collaborating and getting a budget completed, we are well equipped to help in that endeavor. So in your functions as a treasurer, here are some very important, relevant resources to keep in mind. I'm sure that there will be a greater emphasis placed by the office manager moving forward or from another peer, but let me take the opportunity to peruse some of these forms. So first and foremost, confidentiality agreement is critical. When you first begin your term, you must complete this confidentiality agreement before you engage in your role. This is because the confidentiality serves to protect individuals within the organization from disclosure of information that may be detrimental to that individual. Similar to a counseling context, we like to think of a confidentiality agreement as to be put in place such that it maintains a professional environment and that we can function without the worry of our experiences being disclosed without our knowledge. So assuming the confidentiality agreement is complete, we can review the expenditure payment request form, which is used when requesting payments for a line item that has not been purchased yet or for credit card purchases. There is also the reimbursement request form. The reimbursement request form is used for expenses that have already been made. So for instance, if the president has traveled and they need reimbursement for their transportation, it would be prudent for them to complete an expenditure request form and involving 2 additional persons who are not directly affiliated with the expenditure request so that they can vote for approval. Another important form, which may or may not be relevant moving forward, is the board meeting proxy form. In other words, it is an indicator for an alternative proxy for a required meeting, such as our finance committee meeting. And what a proxy is an individual that serves to execute their voting powers that have been bestowed to them by you on a temporary basis. So if there's a if there's a family emergency or if something personal is occurring in your life that inhibits your ability to serve in a meeting, then it will be most prudent for you to secure a proxy. And in fact, I would highly suggest to you to think of a proxy now or start thinking of a proxy moving forward so that you have that in place throughout the year. That being said, it'll be up to you to coordinate with your proxy to make sure that your proxy is in attendance for these important meetings. This form must be completed before the proxy engages, and the proxy must be well informed with the decision-making processes that you are temporarily relinquishing. In other words, don't leave your proxy up a creek without a paddle. Make sure that they know what they're going into with regards to their voting powers, as well as what is to be voted on for that agenda for that specific meeting. Other relevant forms include the training and event submission form. So as you work with your division to establish trainings and functions and such, you want to use this form to make sure that the executive board is abreast of your operations. You also want to complete this training and event submission form so that the office manager can make sure that the membership body has this information. Executive or office manager can do so through email blast as well as social media outreach and other marketing strategies. Finally, there is the email request form, which specific to email blasts can be a great tool to market specific events and such, provide reminders for specific events and such, and other creative purposes relative to the functions of your division. So forms can be found at this web address here. And I'm going to pause the presentation so that I can show you what it looks like just for a brief moment. I'm going to open up Mozilla Firefox, and I'm just going to put in www.flacounseling.org/forms. That's where you want to go. And you will see you'll have to put in your email and your password. And in doing so, remember, before I move forward, make sure that you put in the correct web address. Put in www. Do not forget that, or else you will not get the screen that I'm at. Make sure they know you're not a robot. You log in, and here are all the forms at your disposal. All of the forms that I've discussed are here for you, and use them at your leisure. If you have any questions about these forms, please contact the office manager. She is more than happy to help and make sure that you understand what you're doing in your role as a treasurer pertaining to these forms. That being said, we'll return to the PowerPoint. And with this PowerPoint, let's see if I'm... okay, so these are the forms. There we go. And so relevant contact information, I'm leaving this blank because this presentation may be used in the future. But you know, in entering your role, you want to make sure to secure these contacts. You want the FCA office manager, you want the FCA treasurer, you want the past president, and you want the president. All individuals should serve to be able to provide information and resources for you to feel empowered in your role as a treasurer related to any specific nuances in your organizational functions. That being said, let's return to the case study reflection piece, which of course involves our pal Daniel, who wasn't feeling so sure about their role and function in their division. In other words, Daniel doesn't feel certain about the future of the division they are leading, but now they have you as their treasurer. So with you as the treasurer, reflect on these questions and think to yourself, what concepts from this presentation can you use to help Daniel feel more informed about executing fiscal decisions? What tools can you use to ensure the financial stability of Daniel's division? And finally, how will you help Daniel use the resources provided by this presentation to ensure the level of financial accountability within your division? Take your time to reflect on this, and please use this PowerPoint as well as myself as a resource to help you to feel a sense of how you can support your divisional leadership with financial decisions, with crafting and developing the budget, with maintaining the budget with actual numbers of spending each month, and making sure that you are meeting your financial objectives as stated. And with that being said, I want to part with this quote for you all as you enter your new roles as treasurer, and for others who are assuming their final year in their role as treasurer, which this quote is touching to me. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. And with that, I leave you with well wishes in your new role as treasurer. Good best of luck to you in your financial endeavors. I am here. Your executive board is here. We're all here together. Let's establish future success. Thank you very much.